Greetings and welcome to Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation. To our members, friends, and everyone joining us in our virtual congregation on YouTube today. Hello, I'm the Reverend Robin Landerman Zucker, minister of this congregation, and I will be hosting our virtual worship service today on YouTube for January 31st, 2021, with Worship Associate Nancy Paxton and music from Roomie Wood and Stephanie Galloway. We're glad you're here and that you've made Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation a part of this day in your spiritual life, whether you are a regular viewer or this is the first time you're joining us on YouTube. We're here every week on our YouTube channel, and we will be at home at 510 North LaRue Street in Flagstaff as soon as it is safe to gather again in person. Our congregation is spiritually open and intentionally inclusive. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are always welcome here, and we will joyfully marry you here too. Our members and friends bring many viewpoints, interests, and theologies to our door, and here we trust that you will find a common desire for meaningful community and spiritual growth, and for relevant religious exploration in a framework with very flexible boundaries. Membership in this congregation is open to anyone who chooses to walk with us in the spirit of love, the search for truth, and the pursuit of justice. As I light the chalice, the symbol of our free faith, I invite you to light a chalice or a candle at home and recite the unison words you will see on your screen. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the darkness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our inner connection. The mission and covenant of Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation express our values and our vision of ourselves as a gathered community in the world. Please join me in reciting the mission and covenant. You will see the words on your screen. The mission of Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation is to be a welcoming community that embraces diverse thought and belief and builds a just, peaceful, and compassionate world. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in kindness. Thus do we covenant. And now, Worship Associate Nancy Paxton has some opening words for us.
Our opening words today are by Marge Piercy. It's a poem called Unlearning Not to Speak. Blizzards of paper in slow motion sift through her. In nightmares, she suddenly recalls a class she signed up for but forgot to attend. Now it's too late. Now it's time for finals. Losers will be shot. Phrases of men who lectured her drift and rustle in piles. Why don't you speak up? Why are you shouting? You have the wrong answer, wrong line, wrong face. They tell her she is womb man, baby machine, mirror image, toy, earth mother, penis poor. A dish of synthetic strawberry ice cream. She grunts to a halt. She must learn again to speak, starting with I, starting with we, starting as the infant does, with her own true hunger and pleasure and rage.
Please join me in singing Do You Hear? Do you hear, oh cry through the land. Do you hear? Do you hear? In the heights, on the plain, in the vale, on the main, in the sun, in the rain. Do you hear? Do you hear? Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, of your soul? Hear the cry, fear won't still, hear the heart's call to will, hear a sigh, startling trill in your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, do you hear? All the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers, they are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, do you hear?
Now is the time in our service when members and friends are invited to share personal joy or sorrow in the supportive fellowship of this community. With each joy or sorrow, we drop a stone into a bowl of water to symbolize that what affects one of us affects all of us, just like a stone creating ripples in a stream. I haven't received any specific joys or sorrows this week, although I want to say that we're very glad that our friend Andy is recovering down in Patagonia. So this stone is for him with all of our love. There are people in our lives who have experienced losses. There have been deaths and illnesses and other changes, and certainly many hardships and difficulties that have come from living through the stress of the pandemic these past months. So this is a stone for all of us. A stone that we will all be able, if we wish to, be vaccinated soon, moving us closer to get back to a more textured way of living our lives and being together as a community. And my stone of hope for all of us, remembering that everyone is fighting their own private battle. We know not what it is, but because we're human, we know it to be true. So let us be kind, compassionate, flexible, and forgiving with one another. In a moment, we will have some silent time for you to speak your own joys and sorrows into that space, knowing it's being held by all of us. And a reminder that every Sunday at 11, we have a live post-service gathering on Zoom, and links for that can be found in our e-news on our website. And we invite you to come to connect in community and to share joys and sorrows and what's happening in your life in real time. But now let us speak our joys and sorrows into a collective, supportive silence. Before we go into our breathing time, I also want to remind you that you can reach out to me anytime to talk about what's going on in your life and to have a listening ear and some companionship through this journey. You can write to me at minister@beaconuu.com, and I'll be happy to be in touch and connect with you. And now let's move into our time of intentional breathing, where you put your feet on the floor and uncross your arms and legs. Close your eyes, relax your shoulders, see where you're feeling tension in your body, and just breathe. 4 beats in slowly through your nose, 5 or 6 beats out slowly through your mouth, creating a rhythm, creating spaciousness from the crown of your head down to the soles of your feet. We'll just breathe. Even breathing for 1 minute like this can have tremendous effect. 5 minutes can really transform you, whether it's because you can't sleep or you've just woken up or you need a little breathing Sabbath, spaciousness Sabbath during your day. You carry this with you everywhere. Just breathe. 4 in, 5 or 6 out. While you continue to breathe, I offer this spoken meditation by Ade Ama Karaba, entitled, You Were There. God of Source, we call upon you as our mothers before us. We are lost as they once were. You were there. The way is hard through rugged terrain of hate and indifference. Give us the strength of ruby bridges. You were there. The way is winding through brambles of bigotry and weeds and injustice. Give us the tenacity of Dorothy Height. You were there. Help us find our way, console and comfort, allay our fears. Give us the faith of Polly Murray. You were there. Torch our hearts, unify us, that we may heal each other. Give us the passion of Fannie Lou Hamer. You were there. Let's continue breathing together and then move into our musical breathing meditation together.
Our reading for today is by Audre Lorde from a talk that was given in 1977, later published in her collection, Sister Outsider. I began to ask each time, what's the worst thing that could happen to me if I tell them the truth? Unlike women in other countries, our breaking silence is unlikely to have us jailed, disappeared, or run off the road at night. Our speaking out will irritate some people, get us called bitchy or hypersensitive, and disrupt some dinner parties. And then our speaking out will allow other women to speak until laws are changed and lives are saved and the world is altered forever. Next time, ask, what's the worst that will happen? Then push yourself a little further than you dare. Once you start to speak, people will yell at you. They will interrupt you, put you down, and suggest it's personal. And the world won't end. And the speaking will get easier and easier. And you will find you have fallen in love with your own vision, which you may never have realized you had. And you will lose some friends and lovers and realize you don't miss them. And new ones will find you and cherish you. And you will flirt and paint your nails and dress up and party because I think Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of the revolution. And at last, you'll know with surpassing certainty that only one thing is more frightening than speaking your truth, and that is not speaking.
Squint your eyes and look closer. I'm not between you and your ambition. I am a poster girl with no poster. I am 32 flavors and then some, and I'm beyond your peripheral vision. So you might want to turn your head, 'cause someday you might find you are hungry and eating all of the words that you said. Both my parents taught me about goodwill, and I have done well by their name. Just the kindness they lavish on strangers is more than I can explain. Still there's many who turn out the porch lights just so I will not think they are home, and hide in the dark of the windows till I pass and left them alone. Hey, and God help if you are an ugly girl, 'cause too pretty is also your doom. 'Cause everyone harbors a secret hatred for the prettiest girl in the room. God's help you if you are a phoenix and you dare to rise up from the ash. 1,000 eyes will smolder with jealousy while you are just flying past. Squint your eyes and look closer. I'm not between you and your ambition. I am a poster girl with no poster. I'm 32 flavors and then some, and I'm beyond your peripheral vision. So you might want to turn your head, 'cause someday you might find you are starving and eating all of the words that you said. And I'm not trying to get my half meaning by demeaning you. And I would like to state for the record, I did everything that I could do. And I'm not saying that I am a saint, I just don't want to live that way. No, I will never be a saint, but I will always say, squint your eyes and look closer. I'm not between you and your ambition. I am a poster girl with no poster. I am 32 flavors and then some, and I'm beyond your peripheral vision. So you might want to turn your head, 'cause someday you might find you are starving and eating all of the words that you said.
My sermon today is entitled, Nevertheless, She Persisted, Esther and Kamala Speak. When I was a girl attending Sunday school at Beth Shalom Synagogue in Pittsburgh, one of the absolute highlights of the year was the annual Purim play, or spiel. One girl from each class was chosen to play Queen Esther, and one boy was chosen to play the evil Haman. And we would parade down the aisles of the sanctuary. The girls wore long white dresses and gold paper crowns, and the boys wore black outfits, three-cornered hats, and mascara mustaches. In relatively modern times, the popularity of these Purim spiels and the boisterous audience reaction they engendered spilled over into the actual synagogue celebration of Purim when the scroll of Esther is chanted in Hebrew. That is known as the whole Megillah. This year, Purim occurs on February 25th. There is an ancient tradition derived from Torah that one is supposed to blot out the mention of Haman as a form of enduring spiritual punishment and disgrace for his actions. Therefore, synagogue attendees attempt to blot out Haman's name with literally shouting and catcalling and booing and swinging noisemakers called groggers to drown out the name of Haman as it's read. If it were only so simple in these strange and disturbing times of female senators being shouted down, rampant sexual abuse, attempts to squash reproductive rights, the ongoing denigration of women in our culture, and the onslaught of misinformation, much of it misogynist over the past 4 years. If only we had some groggers to drown that out for our modern day Hamans. I suppose you could say that women and their allies across gender lines have been swinging one very large and loud grogger as participants in the Me Too, Time's Up, and I'm Speaking movements. For many, the Women's March of January 21st, 2017, which involved millions of people worldwide, drew a line in the sand. I was there in DC in my pink knitted pussy hat, a reference and response to the president's vulgar brag about what he was able to grab because of his celebrity. I believe Queen Esther might have shown up too, as she does in her own way in the Purim story from the book of Esther in Hebrew scripture. The Megillah has many layers, but I'll break it down into a simple outline. The king dethrones Queen Vashti because she defies him. Esther is an orphan who was crowned queen after winning a contest based on beauty and sexual prowess, but the king is not aware that she is a Jew. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, uncovers a plot to kill the king and reports it, and the king promotes Haman to the position of vizier, making him more powerful than all the other officials. Mordecai refuses to bow before Haman, and Haman seeks to destroy the Jews after his run-in with Mordecai, and he receives approval. Mordecai appeals to Esther to save her people. She approaches the king, even though she wasn't summoned, which is a major no-no, and invites him and Haman to a banquet. Mordecai is honored for having saved the king's life. Esther entertains the king and Haman and invites them to a second banquet. It is there that Esther pleads for her people, and she accuses Haman of treachery. The king grants Esther's request and condemns Haman to die to the gallows that he had built for the Jews. The Jews have to defend themselves anyway throughout Persia against those following out the decree to destroy them, but the holiday of Purim is established. Mordecai is advanced to the position of importance. Esther lives, she saves the day, and she's forever remembered for her courage to unsilence her voice and to claim her identity, even though it is extremely dangerous and could have ended up very, very differently. One could argue easily that Esther is like the woman in Marge Piercy's poem, Unlearning to Speak, which Nancy read for us earlier. She grunts to a halt. She must learn again to speak, starting with I, starting with we, starting as an infant does, with her own true hunger and pleasure and rage. The newer social speak up movements have harnessed this hunger, pleasure, and rage in effective, visible, and crucial ways. Systemic misogyny, sexual assault, and harassment are not new. Subjugation of and violence against women are not new either, whether they are cisgender or trans. These phenomena have happened in the workplace, in homes, public bathrooms, schools, churches, Hollywood, and Washington, D.C., for as long as women have attempted to take up space and men have sought to overpower them. So it's quite noteworthy that women who have been acculturated to keep quiet, deny the truth, internalize it, and swallow the shame are unsilencing themselves and saying, "Time's up," or "I'm speaking." Famous women like our new Vice President, Kamala Harris, and regular gals across racial lines lead the way, shining a light on the essential interconnectedness between female, male, and trans liberation. Several years ago, I was privileged to hear the author Susan Faludi speak in Pittsburgh. She is well known for her first book, published in 1991, called Backlash: The Undeclared War Against American Women. Her thesis that various groups were aligned in an assault on feminism was widely reviewed, praised by some, and also subjected to harsh critiques and put downs. Faludi recognized the link between her findings in Backlash, which won the National Book Critics Award, and the plight of American men when she wrote her second book called Stifled: The Betrayal of the American Man in 1999. In an interview with Mother Jones magazine, Faludi remarked, "I don't know how you can be a feminist and not also think about men. In order for women to live freely, men have to live freely too. Being a feminist in the true sense opens your eyes to the way men, like women, are imprisoned in cultural stereotypes." People weren't really talking about trans culture back then, so her arguments are framed in a heteronormative way. And this problem is systemic and pervasive. My colleague, the Reverend Emily Wright Magoon, agrees, and she writes, "We must learn to see sexism and toxic masculinity in the same way we see racism and white supremacy. It is the air we breathe. It is our conscious and unconscious behavior. This is on all of us. So the solution, the cure, is on all of us too." As a culture, we do not need to be defined by abusive misogyny, a place where locker room talk is brushed off, boys are subjected to a shame-hardening process that prevents the development of empathy, and where girls are taught to be slim and submissive, and that their worth is in their beauty and sexuality, like Esther, rather than their intelligence or their empathy or their grit. I didn't have a hippie grandmother like the one that Reeve Lindbergh talks about in her picture book about her grandmother, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, a wonderful book for children. But I did have an exceptional role model for resilience and persistence in my grandmother, my grandma Esther. And it's just a lucky coincidence on the name this morning. I was a tomboy in my early years, yet the pressure to conform to soul-crushing gender norms was activated in my adolescence, as it was for my brother, my son, and my daughter. Then, as now, Both the female and male heteronormative paradigms in our culture are painfully broken. As a result, cisgendered men are often ill-equipped to access emotions, resources, and the responses needed to transform toxic masculine norms in our culture to healthy ones. Is it any wonder then that those who claim non-binary gender identities trigger intense animosity and even violence from cisgendered men? If female liberation cannot occur without male liberation, then trans liberation cannot occur without both. With effort, I believe we can shift into a culture where, to paraphrase Judy Chicago, both men and women and everyone will be gentle and will be strong. Let's remember that these imprints are long-standing, they're ancient, and they undergird the religious rights oppression of women. In Hebrew scripture, women like Esther were property. This is why the widowed Ruth famously chose to follow Naomi into a new and strange land rather than go back to Moab and be given to her brother-in-law as property. Prior to the advent of Judeo-Christian beliefs, goddesses prevailed in pagan spirituality. They were revered. Do you know the famous image of St. Patrick beating the snakes with a staff, beating the snakes out of Ireland? Well, the symbol of the goddess is the snake, and that much celebrated image represents 4th century Christianity beating the goddesses out of the Celtic, earth-centered, goddess-centered belief system, or at least attempting to, and they did succeed over time. It was challenging to convince pagans to give up the goddess, so they built abbeys on top of goddesses' sacred sites, most notoriously the one honoring Bridget. Under Patrick's tutelage, she was transformed from a triune, fertile goddess into a chaste saint. And the early church fathers, they had a hand in demonizing women, associating them with the flesh and evil tendencies. Eve got the ball rolling. And men, on the other hand, were linked to the superior faculties of the mind and reason, and closer to the image of God to boot. Thanks to Tertullian and his cronies, thousands of women have been burned, stoned, drowned, and disowned for supposedly going against prevailing male-dominated Western religious doctrine. Sadly, we've seen this in Islam as well, another of the Abrahamic faiths. Alice Walker unearthed this deception in her poem called Pagan. I laugh to see this was our religion all along, she laments, hidden even from ourselves, taught early not to touch the earth, years of white gloves, straight-seamed hose, being good girls. Scripture like chains, dogma like flies, smiles like lock and lies. The Me Too movement, the Women's March, and other groups, they've sought to bring attention, awareness, and repair to this systemic and deeply rooted dysfunction. It is an intercessory movement, and now an intersectional one. Let's explore what is required to be an effective intercessor and return to Queen Esther as our model. First, she is open to the needs of her people and also has to go through a transformational process herself to become an intercessor, and so do we. And she has to be brave. She has to ask the question that Audre Lorde posed in our reading. What is the worst that will happen if I tell the truth? She needs to be grounded in order to transcend the protocol of the court, and she has to risk the king's volatile temper and his rampant egotism to approach him of her own initiative without being summoned. She has to persist. She has to take risks. You may recognize my sermon title today from a now legendary event in Congress, during which the Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts went to the microphone without being summoned to quote a letter from Coretta Scott King denouncing Jeff Sessions as a racist during his confirmation hearings for Attorney General. Social media roared, using Mitch McConnell's words in a rallying cry against what they saw as an attempt by a powerful man to silence a woman who was speaking her mind. His words, she was warned, she was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted. The imagery of a man silencing a woman struck some as all too common, and his language rang familiar with many women who have had their own stories of being silenced. Nevertheless, she persisted, served as a hashtag-ready motto for women at the ready to break barriers and stop being shushed, even if they might lose friends and family, and even though it wasn't easy. And more recently, during the vice presidential debate in October of 2020, Mike Pence consistently interrupted his opponent, Kamala Harris, a female person of color. Finally, Harris turned to him and said, "Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking." Then she had to repeat herself over more interruptions. Of course, the line went viral, and it became a hashtag I'm speaking, as women everywhere were able to recall incidences of being talked over by men. Yes, women interrupt too. I work on that myself. Yet studies show that women are interrupted by men 33% more when they are speaking with men. We recall Speaker Nancy Pelosi as a rejoinder to President Trump, his attempts to interrupt and undercut her too. Mr. President, this is my time and I control it. The sensation of the Biden inauguration, poet Amanda Gorman, another young woman of color, tells us during a TED Talk she gave during her student days at Harvard that using your voice is a political choice. Uncle Mordecai urges his niece Esther to persist too and to make that very choice. He raised and perhaps pricked her consciousness. He warned Esther against self-preservation, cautioning her that if in her efforts to save herself, deliverance for her people arose from another place, Esther's silence would not save her in the end. She would perish too. Then Mordecai confronted her with these now timeless words that resonate in the spirit of every leader, female, male, trans, or otherwise, challenged to fight for justice and to work on behalf of others. He says, "And who knows but that you have come to the royal position for such a time as this." Mordecai's next challenge also resonates for us as members and allies of these new movements. He lifts up the truth that the intercessor cannot truly tell another's story until she gets in touch with her own and sees the interconnectedness of her story with others. That's where intersectionality comes into play. Mordecai charged Esther with reviewing her own life story, for though she was a Jew living incognito, her personal story, her very being, was inextricably linked to the story of all Jews in the diaspora. By marshaling her courage, freeing her tongue, and telling her story, she would also be telling the very story of God and God's people, God's chosen people, the Jews. Holocaust Remembrance Day took place just this past week on January 26th. And it's a sad truth that we absolutely require this yearly reminder about the cost of silence in the face of evil, and that we can not be silent again, never again, whether it's about the Jewish people, whether it's about white supremacy movements, neo-Nazis, or anyone that seeks to oppress or destroy groups of people. My colleague, the Reverend Erica Ewart, addresses the cost of silence, telling us silence is dynamic. It does things. When silence becomes a living character in our personal narratives, it's often an accomplice to a power imposed over another. What does silence gain us? Ewart asks. What does silence cost? These days, most of the women I know are grappling with rage, she says. It stems from the way we've been violated and from having to question or validate what our souls know to be true. I believe that our rage is also rooted in how complicated it is to break silence, to open all of the secrets in all of our broken hearts. But silence does break. Truth seeks light. Our secrets are beginning to breathe fresh air again and noticing they're not alone. That healing is partly fueled by the half-life of rage, but even more, we're unraveling silence because so many of us have determined that our power with one another is greater than the power someone once had over us. In her book, Leading Ladies, Transforming Biblical Images of Women's Leadership, the author Jean Porter notes that successful interventions are timely and effective. To intervene means to step into a situation and alter its direction, its course, or its dynamics. And ultimately, Esther, her story, her biblical story, reminds us of the power of empowerment. The intercessory leader must be able to communicate across the divide in order to empower people, the end result of helping people fight for themselves. Regardless of your gender identity, ask yourself whether you have been placed or called to intercede or unsilence your voice as part of an important movement in society. Some of you have been placed, like Esther, in positions of influence and connection. You are where you are for a reason. Perhaps it is to serve as a leader or as a persistent advocate, an ally, or an activist. Perhaps you are in a position to challenge an oppressive process in your community and create opportunities for change. Perhaps you are raising a child and can impact future generations and how they embrace healthy gender paradigms and behaviors. I believe we have all been placed to listen to each other's stories and heed the voices shouting enough or quietly uttering me too or boldly stating I'm speaking. Together we may risk vulnerability, risk being known, risk pain, risk not being believed, risk leaving the shadows and stepping into the light, risk losing friends and family, risk being brave. May we swing our graggers noisily and in solidarity, joining our brave together. For as Tess Gallagher reminds us in her poem, Refusing Silence, there are messages to send, gatherings and songs, because we need to insist. Else, what are we for? What use are we? So may we rise and persist. Shalom. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen.
Please join me in singing If Every Woman in the World. If every woman in the world had her mind set on freedom, if every woman in the world dreamed a sweet dream of peace, if every woman of every nation held her hands out in the name of love, there would be no more war. If every man of every nation had his mind set on freedom, if every man stood with brother as a witness for peace, if every man of every nation, young and old, each generation, had his hands out in the name of love, there would be no more war. If every leader in the world had a vision of freedom, if every leader in the world shared a sweet dream of peace, if every leader of every nation worked for justice and liberation, holding hands out in the name of love, there would be no more war. If every nation in the world set a true course for freedom, if every nation raised its children in a culture of peace, if all our sons and all our daughters reached in friendship across the waters, refusing to be enemies, there would be no more war.
The spirit of generosity and gratitude flow through Beacon. Whether we're here in our physical sanctuary or here in our virtual sanctuary, we take an offering each week to support Beacon and our programs. There are two ways for you to make a donation. One is to go to our website, beaconuu.com, find the donate button, and make a secure online donation through the Venco application. If you use this method, we ask that you use a bank account rather than a credit card to save us some fees so that we'll have more for Beacon. Or you can send us a check to Beacon, 510 North LaRue Street, Flagstaff, Arizona, 86001. Either way, we are so grateful for your generosity, particularly during this challenging time. And finally, at the end of our service, when we're here together, and we've been doing this each week on YouTube, we come together, hold hands, and feel the warmth and the power and the connection of this community. So I invite you to do that now, to imagine us here, holding hands, feeling the warmth, feeling the power. For whether we are together or apart, we are Beacon, always connected. Stay well. Stay warm. Nancy has some closing words for us. Blessed be, and blessed we, and amen.
Our closing words are by Tess Gallagher from a poem called Refusing Silence. Heartbeat trembling, your kingdom of leaves near the ceremony of water. I never insisted on you. I admit I delayed. I was the empress of delay. But it can't be put off now. On the sacred branch of my only voice, I insist. Insist for us all, which is the job of the voice and especially of the poet. Else, what am I for? What use am I if I don't insist? There are messages to send, gatherings and songs, because we need to insist. Else, what are we for? What use are we?